Caroline Foran, welcome to the Mindful Podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. It's already so relaxing just being in your presence.
Oh, that's nice of you to say. Maybe check back in 20 minutes. Hopefully I won't put you under too much pressure. I'm so excited to talk to you. We've had occasions in the past to have chats on the radio, but as we know, commercial radio can box you into these little segments. So I'm so excited to have this room and space and most of all, your time to discuss these things. When your anxiety was at its worst, how did it feel in your body?
It was very physical for me. The physical and the emotional were one and the same. At the height of it, I would describe it as I could have been sitting on this chair here. You wouldn't have been necessarily any the wiser what was going on for me, but a panic attack could erupt inside me. And it was like a volcano or a very intense heat that would just radiate out from my center out to the, my extremities.
Is that your heart, your solar plexus, your gut? Where would it start?
I feel it in my chest probably, but not necessarily a tightening of the chest. Like I did get those symptoms, but it was more just this intense awareness of this kind of stagnant energy that was looking for somewhere to go. In typical fight or flight mode, our bodies want to fight or flight, but you're sitting on your sofa, you're not actually facing any threats, so it just bounces.
The scatter cushions are coming for me.
It just bounces around your body, and this really intense feeling of I never worried about I'm going to die in this moment. It was, oh my God, if this is happening to you, you're losing your mind. And that was the biggest fear. And the fear that I could just have a thought and have such a physical reaction. Like that was, it was really terrifying to me.
Was it a thought that necessarily kickstarted the physical reaction, or was it just something that came upon you like a headache?
No, it would be typically thought-based.
What kind of thoughts can you...
Well, at the time when it was so bad, the anxiety was fueling the anxiety. So I was like, I can't believe that you're so mentally unwell. I would try so hard not to think about it. I would just think, what if you're always like this? What if you're never okay again? What if you're just going to unravel completely? And that alone would be enough to set the bomb off inside me. So it got to the point where it was so bad that it wasn't anything tangible, like I'm anxious about this thing. I was absolutely rattling with anxiety in my own body because of my own self. Like it was just awful.
I've spoken before about a big panic attack that I had back in the noughties. And I had never felt anything like that before. It wasn't as if it was something I'd had all my life and this was just an exaggerated version. For me, it felt like it was sort of around my solar plexus, maybe just a little bit below. So kind of between the bottom of my rib cage and my belly button, somewhere in there. And that's where it sort of started. Again, with that sort of heat. But to me, it felt like I compare it to TV static started to fill my body. So instead of blood, I had that,
Yeah.
And it was so foreign a feeling to me that it absolutely freaked me out. I'd never had it before, so I thought I was dying. I didn't know I thought this is what a heart attack feels like, or a stroke or something.
Funnily enough, to me, those thoughts, I never feared them because I wanted there to be something I could put the blame on. I wanted to be able to say, there's something wrong with your heart, let's go get it fixed, because then it's not your fault. It's not me. So the biggest fear for me was the fear of losing our mind, which is one of our greatest human fears. I think that everyone has deep down somewhere, the fear that we'll just lose it and go crazy. On top of those physical feelings was also this sense of, like the ozone layer, this protective layer that I just don't have one, that I felt porous and physically very vulnerable to lights and stimuli around me. And just like I was moving through the world without this bubble that most people seem to have of distance between themselves and everything else. It was just...
Like your shields were down.
My shields were down.
You were a spaceship.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. For me at the time, I put it down to probably lots of things, but it was a life soup that I was cooking for myself at the time, which had lack of sleep, overwork, saying yes to everything. Social anxiety that I didn't realize I had it. All these kind of pressures of having a new family, and alcohol was a massive contributor. What were you doing at the time when this emerged for you?
I think it was going to catch me eventually, and it had been there all my life, but it just came to this crescendo. So at the time, and I always feel like with this question, because I was so bad and so unwell, that people expect some, dramatic, I was at this moment and this juncture, and really it was very normal, ordinary life stuff. I just moved in with my boyfriend, which was a good, positive thing. I moved out of my family home in with my boyfriend, who's now my husband. And at around the same 2-week period, I started a new job, and it was just a lot of change for me. And in another time in my life, it mightn't have rocked me, but for whatever reason, I think I had been suppressing this anxiety my whole life, and it was waiting for a moment to crank it up a notch. And it had always to that point been coming out in like digestive issues, tummy issues. I always had struggles there.
As a kid?
As a teenager.
Were you one of those children who might have had difficulty getting to sleep, or have been waking up at nightmares and coming into your parents and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I have this strong memory of, only being able to go to sleep when I knew that my brother or my parents were on the same level as me, and this intense fear of like, go up and brush your teeth and get ready for bed. And I was like, I don't want to go up there, like most kids have, but I just had a very fertile imagination. But I remember a while after my granddad had died, and I was really frightened of the idea that someone I knew was dead, and people say, oh, he's still with you. I was like, I don't want him to be with me. Like, that's petrifying.
Yeah. So
I had to sleep with my brother for night after night after night, and I would beg him, and he was like 14 and I was 7 or 8. And I was like, please let me sleep with you. And I couldn't explain it at all then. Nobody else could. I didn't understand it. It was always just, Caroline has just a bit of a nervous tummy and she's just a bit like that. And so it was there the whole time. And it was only in my mid-20s, so this is 10 years ago now, that it all came to the big bang, I suppose. My annus horribilis, as I describe it. And
would you have been a sensitive child, would they have said?
Yeah, I think so. Looking back, I can see so clearly that I was a very anxious, frightened child. And I think I've tried to understand it more. And I think people look for things like trauma, which obviously can explain a lot. I think there's a lot of small T traumas that kids go through that seem innocuous to an adult or to a parent. But when your brain is at that stage of developing, and when you're able to store long-term fear memories, but you're not able to rationalize them, things that seem so ordinary to a grown-up can register with a child on a different level. And I know that now, but I didn't know that then, and no one else knew that then either. This wasn't the conversations we were having. But I also think that I just came into the world, a bit like my son, with what psychologists would describe as this smaller window of tolerance, where it's like a more sensitive disposition. So what it takes for me to, if you imagine like a square, and you're in a window and you go through something stressful, and it doesn't take very much for me to whack off the sides and I'm popped outside my window. But you might have a much bigger window of tolerance and much more space and wiggle room in which to exist in the world and feel things and have things happen, like, sleepovers at your friend's house that mightn't throw you, but that would be a little bit outside of my window of tolerance, like a comfort zone thing. And so I do believe that I just was a person who was born with, like a lot of people, just a slightly more sensitive disposition. And when you're in society expected to pop out of that window so soon, that's when, it can manifest in anxiety, which would have manifested in tummy issues because I was so young. And that's how it shows up for an awful lot of kids.
So you start this new job.
Yes.
You've moved in with the boyfriend. Everything on paper looks awesome.
Yeah.
What happens then?
Within a matter of days of starting the new job, all those tummy issues came back, and I had this real strong sense of, I don't want to be here. Like, why did I do this? And, it was 2014. We weren't being vulnerable on social media. It was highlights only, best bits, best foot forward. And And I had just left a very cushy, lovely job. And I foolishly thought that you can't get comfortable. You have to keep pushing. And now I would say to anyone, if you're enjoying where you are and you're happy, like that is worth its weight in gold for a while. We don't always need to be on to the next thing, on to the next thing. But that was the culture at the time. You know, that was the...
Well, it still is.
Well, it still is too. I'm hoping it's changing, but maybe not. So I felt this massive weight of, I can't backtrack now. And I just moved out, so I suddenly was a grown up with responsibilities and bills to pay. My job had been replaced. I couldn't go backwards. I felt like I just couldn't say any of this out loud because I felt like I was, you know, God, you should just be able to get on with it. Everyone else is handling so much more than you, and people are in really stressful jobs. It wasn't the job itself. It was just the situation, the change for me had such a reaction in my body at that time in my life where it felt like every fibre of my being was like, this is not right for you. But I felt like I couldn't address that. So that's why it came out again in all the tummy issues. And I remember desperately trying to deny the mental thoughts that were accompanying it and just think, it must be something, you must have a new intolerance, there must be something going on. And every doctor I went to was just focused on my gut issues as opposed to the full picture, which was so blindingly obvious, like to me now, and to anyone who I talked to about it, that it was just the conditions were perfect for anxiety at the time.
Well, we're quite a symptom-driven, society in terms of a medical approach to things.
Exactly. So it was just treat the tummy. And I was like, it's not getting better. And I always describe it as, anxiety is sort of a compass that's actually useful in your life that comes along to warn you and notify you when you've really veered off track. And the communication system for me through my life was always through my tummy, and I never got it. I never connected the dots. I never paid attention. Now I was at such a critical point where it started again saying, like, we've got to tell her this is not right. She's not listening. She's not getting the message. She's chasing down rabbit holes of things that are not the problem.
Was there at one point where you thought it might be the water?
Yeah. So I was so far gone in denial and wanting there to be something other than me that was, I suppose, the reason for it. And I had moved, like, I'm a proud Northsider, and I moved to the south side to Milltown. I was like, it could be the fluoride in the water. It could be the South Dublin City tap water. And when I said that to a few people and they were like, huh? I kind of knew she's lost it now, definitely. So,
well, I think people can relate to that. Maybe, you could think on paper it might sound silly, but we start to look for things.
Yeah.
If we're not getting any answers, we'll start to do our own crappy research in our minds, go, oh yeah, maybe it is. Maybe I am allergic to Brazil nuts. Yeah. Maybe that's it.
And every symptom I had, you can pop it into Google and churn out, it's confirmation bias, like whatever you want to believe you have, it'll tell you. So I was convinced then I had all different kinds of cancers, and all of that fueled the anxiety more and more. It was just kind of growing arms and legs. And then eventually, I remember so vividly the day, and I really do I ascribe this kind of personality to the anxiety that it's like, she's not listening, just park the tummy issues and throw in horrific panic attacks and she might pay attention then. So I had this awful, awful panic attack, probably my first of that time that I knew of as a panic attack. I had been up all night, unable to sleep. I was Googling like different kinds of ovarian, cervical cancers, thinking that sounds like me. But all the while knowing, subconsciously, you're just falling apart here and there's nothing else going on apart from that. And I was trying to get ready to go into the job, which...
How reassuring that thought was. Hey, look, it's okay.
You're
put the laptop away.
Down.
You're just falling to pieces. Okay, great.
And you might never come back. And everyone thinks you're gone mad and no one can help you.
But there is no logical... Like, you've moved beyond logical thought at that point.
Exactly.
I know you talk about anxiety goggles. That when you're in that mode, that high stress, high cortisol, freaking out mode, you're not going to see things through a logical lens, really, are you?
And it took me a long time to realise that, and a lot of like diary keeping, and also my husband, well, then at the time boyfriend, being able to say, everything that you feel and think when you have this, I would describe them as an anxious wave, because at the time it was either an intense wave or it would kind of recede just a little bit, like for, weeks or a week at a time or a few days at a time. And then it would come back again, like literally crashing on the shore.
Was there a time of day that was worse?
Mornings were absolutely horrendous. And
do you know why that is?
Yes, because we naturally produce cortisol in the morning to wake our bodies up. So we have this careful balance of melatonin and cortisol. Melatonin to help us settle down and sleep at night. Cortisol is the stress hormone, but it's also there. We need it to function. It's there to like wake us up during the day. So because I was producing so much cortisol, my melatonin, first of all, wasn't getting a look in. So I was just wired all night, unable to sleep. And then in the morning, when I was already up to 90 with the cortisol, I'd get this extra shot, like a triple espresso of cortisol. And I didn't understand, like it took me a long time to learn that. It took a lot of like self-learning. But in the morning, if it was a case of waking up or just it being morning because I was already awake, back to that really physical, like crystallized anxiety, blocks and lumps all throughout my limbs, like aches and pains. And
was it kind of fluey?
Yeah, really fluey, really intense, like feeling of needing to like foam roll it out of me or something like that. And at the time thinking, I cannot get out from under these covers. I cannot. And then eventually realizing it's not moving until you do that, until you start to let the anxiety move through you, and until I could understand that it wasn't just some really bizarre, I wasn't just suddenly afraid of the morning. It was like hormonal. That helped me separate again, because a lot of the anxiety at the root of it was this fear that it's all me and all my fault. So when I could start to pull things apart and say, well, let's look at this from a hormonal perspective or a physical perspective. Yes, you're involved in the mix, but you can't just think your way out of this now. You can't just wake up and say, I don't want to feel, I know that I'm anxious and I don't want to. My body was there. It had been so wound up to this point of anxiety that was chronic and very debilitating. It was going to take a long time to unwind it all. And it wasn't going to be a matter of thinking it through. But at that point, like I say, the tummy issues kind of settled, because now I was just in the throes of anxiety and panic attacks.
All throughout your body. What were the night times like? Was there, when you did sleep, did you wake up in the middle of the night?
Yeah.
Did you have night sweats? Were there nightmares? What was nighttime like?
I actually would have a lot of dreams where in my dreams I'd be okay. And then I'd wake up and I'd get this horrible feeling of, like, your dreams are better than reality. And in my dreams, I would maybe be in scenarios that I wasn't able to cope with in real life. I guess my brain was trying to work through stuff. So that was a really, sometimes we wake up from a nightmare and we get comforted that we're okay. But to wake up and realize, actually, I'm not okay in real life. It was really, really jarring.
Because the sleep can be so tricky for people because, it's another thing that adds to it. So you're going to bed anxious. The anxiety has been keeping you awake. So you're going to bed anxious about being awake or waking up in the middle of the night. Then you wake up in the middle of the night and you're anxious about not getting back to sleep and how tired you're going to be for the rest of the day. And that's going to fuel more anxiety.
And that's there for people at the best of times, if you get into that cycle. So that was, it was one massive vicious circle of, all these things feeding into it. And
you touched on it a little bit. Is there guilt and shame around it?
Yeah, massively.
In that somehow you're getting life wrong and everyone else has it sussed. Were you feeling that? And what was it like when you had to take time off work?
I felt a massive amount of shame and embarrassment that I couldn't just hack it. And, people would say to me, but like, sure, look at you, you're grand. And on paper, everything was fine. And I was very, I am very privileged. I had a very lovely existence. And that sort of fed into the, you should be okay, but you're not. And that just kind of added more fuel to the fire. But I still struggle a lot with this idea of self-blame or shame. And I know we'll get on to the parenting thing as well, which is where it can really ramp up. But at the time, I felt mortified that I just wasn't able to cope with life, and this feeling that something I'd slipped through the cracks in some way, or I was lacking in something that helped me. Just people are like, what? Just don't think about it. Just like, and I was so jealous of people who could just, Like my brother was the complete opposite to me. He was traveling the world, just didn't really ever get too bogged down in thoughts about things. And I was like, how are people not thinking about this stuff? You know, I was so deep in it.
And was it that you were having constant anxious thoughts and they were causing this physical reaction? Or was it, I'm just trying to get through my day and my body's doing weird stuff? And then as a result of that, I'm being anxious because I don't know what's wrong with me? Or is it like a two-way street?
It's a two-way street, definitely. I had to address it from both sides because, you know, yeah, absolutely anxious thoughts would come immediately, like a switch, turn on anxious symptoms in my body. But also, I didn't stand a chance mentally. If my body was experiencing anxiety, I couldn't think my way out of that. So I had to address the physical and the mental. So I eventually was prescribed melatonin to help me just start to regulate those hormones. There was many different things I tried. There were so many things that I tried, which is why I wrote the book, really, the first book, because you're so vulnerable at that point. Like if I'm thinking it's potentially the fluoride in the water, then I am ripe for the picking for any, gimmick, any chancer comes along and says, do this one thing and you'll never feel it again. And I'm like, here's all my money, which I didn't have any of.
Did you go to some dodgy did you seek out treatments that weren't helpful?
Yeah, I sought out a lot of things that were promising quick fixes, and there's an awful lot of that out there. And there's a lot of codgers and people who can say, because they've maybe had the experience of having this moment of enlightenment, of having years and years of depression, anxiety and panic attacks, and suddenly they just realised they could just not do that anymore. And all it took was for them to say this one thing over and over again, and you can do that too, and I'm going to give you the secret. And that is a massive case of confirmation bias happening for that person when you can retrospectively, fit it out, say, well, that I can put that into that context, that makes sense. But that's not how it works for a lot of people. And it infuriates me like that happens, and that I was in that space of really trusting and believing people. And it's not that they're like liars, but they mean well, but it's just not how the human body and mind work. Unless, first of all, I'm way too like realistic and practical for that. Eventually I was going to say, hold on a minute. I couldn't just, I remember getting so angry reading, and this is a book that people love, but reading Eckhart Tolle's book. What was it? What's that?
Power of Now?
I hated it. I was so annoyed at him because it was like, just be in the now and don't feel anything. And he talks about how he was just looking at a tree and he just realised that he could just let go of everything. And I'm there staring at trees in parks being like, come on. I'm like, is it gone? Is it gone? I think it's gone. I think it's actually gone.
Well, doesn't that, again, it means well,
yeah,
but doesn't that kind of, let's call it self-help advice, put more pressure on you? The blame is now back on you. If you can't look at a tree and be enlightened and suddenly let the anxiety go like a feather in the wind, now it's your fault again. So not only are you getting life wrong being anxious, you can't even use the tools that other people are suggesting to fix yourself.
Oh, so don't even get me started. And then this is why I also have a massive issue with this whole trend of manifestation at the moment, because when it's not working, it's just that it's your fault that you can't think your way out of difficult circumstances. And
you're manifesting wrong.
Yeah.
Or if you get sick, that's the one that I hate, maybe you're unlucky enough to develop cancer. What have you been doing to manifest that in your life?
Did you not put it on your vision board not to get cancer?
Yeah.
Like, it's outrageous when you think about it that way.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of that going on where it was my fault. I just need to think this way. And I remember going specifically, I begged my mum to drive me halfway down the country to this quack who promised me the earth, moon and stars. And my mum had no idea at the time. She was just like, Jesus, how can I help her? She was very open to everything that I was suggesting. But she wouldn't have had, like, now if it was me and my son, I'd be like, Caelan, that's absolute bollocks. And let me tell you why. But she was none the wiser. So she was like, yeah, I'll do absolutely anything that will help you. And we drove down to this guy. And again, like in itself, it was like a relaxing experience. Like on a lot of these holistic, self-helpy things or treatments that are kind of alternative, I suppose, in and of themselves are very good because they're relaxing, and anything that takes you out of that stress state is going to be good for you. But I went into it thinking, I'm going to walk out here, I've been promised I'm never going to feel it again, And I fully believed that. And when I was in there and he like just put some things up to my temples, like hooked some things up to me that was going to send some kind of vibrations. And I was like, great. I don't really remember much else of what was said, but I was so firm of the belief that this was it now. I found the guy with the secret. And I walked out of there and I was like, said to my mom, and I felt so different. And I was like, it was so, what's the word, like placebo effect, you know, psychosomatic. And I said, like, it's gone. And she was like, great. And then we kept driving on down to Dingle where my parents now live, and my dad was down there waiting for us. And I got there and I was able to text my boyfriend who was climbing Kilimanjaro, and he'd been so stressed about leaving me. And I was like, it's actually all gone. So you can relax and enjoy the mountain. And
yeah, I've just done Kilimanjaro. It's not particularly relaxing.
Have a ball. And then we were having dinner and I was just like, oh, this just feels like such a weight off my shoulders. I've let it go. I've just gathered it all up and said, don't need you anymore. And then I went to bed that night and my mom was like, okay, good night. And they were sleeping upstairs and I was downstairs. And again, I don't like that. I don't like being on the floor by myself. And she was like, you're okay. And I was like, yeah, no, I think I'm good. And then I just was on my own and I was like, I think I'm good. Yeah, am I good? Oh, what's that feeling? And then it was like this wave of, no, it's still there. No, you're not okay. Oh my God, it didn't work. Oh my God, you are broken. You are unfixable. Nothing is going to help you. You are so mentally gone and damaged that that's it now for you. And I had to go up and for the rest of the week ask my dad to sleep downstairs so I could sleep beside my mom, or not sleep beside her, just be beside her, just to feel some kind of comfort. And do you know how embarrassing that is in your mid-20s to be like, I need to sleep with my mom and dad? Well, just my mom, because it wasn't enough room. But to
I usually find the dad usually gets pushed out of the bed eventually.
I was finally out on my own. They were like, great. She'd been a bit of a nervous Nancy her whole life. And now here she is coming back being like, I need to sleep in the same bed as you. I'm not okay. I need you to be with me at all times. That was like a serious low point because I went from thinking, I figured it out to, oh my God, you are beyond saving. And I remember sitting on the floor of a shower, my mom having to come in and pick me off the floor because I just needed to have the warm water on my body. And she sat down with a pen and paper and she was like, we are going to figure this out. And we started writing down loads of different things. She found an acupuncturist who sounded lovely, who was just going to help me just address some of those physical symptoms of the, you know, finding the nights hard, finding the mornings hard, the tension in my body. I was like, we'll just start with one thing. And it was the hardest road I hope I'll ever have to go down in terms of that mental climb from believing that I was really irreparably damaged in some way and that it was my fault, to then starting to, it took about 2 years for me to probably be back on my feet.
So there's people listening who are resonating with parts of your story. Some of them, all of it. Oh my God, that's me. There's people listening going, that's me, or that was me, or I'm worried that could be me. You know, maybe there's elements of your story that go, okay, I don't think I'm exactly that, but I can relate to this part. What were the things that you did? Because that's what they're going, Dermot,
hurry up.
Get to the bit where the solutions come. Okay, we get the story, the picture's been painted.
It was shit.
Yeah, we get it. What did you do? Now, you know, everyone wants to hear, well, I just took this blue pill and everything was fine. Or I jogged 5K every day and now I'm great.
Well, I did take some pills.
Okay, so, well, look, let's start with that. Because medication, I think, can get a bad rap.
Yes.
And I think there are times when we are acutely suffering. I see it as, you know, when you pitch a tent and you have the guy, whatever you call them, the strings that come off a tent that you stick into the ground to hold it in place. I see meditation or medication as that it serves a great purpose sometimes when you just need some stability so that you can work on yourself.
Like the scaffolding?
Perfect. A way better example.
The tent and the pins and the electric picnic.
Okay, scaffolding, the metal things that go around a bit. Yeah, so that's how I would see it. So as a support structure to allow you the energy and stability to move forward.
I will defend medication endlessly because people think of it as a cop-out or as more proof that you're crazy or it's your fault or that you're just looking for an easy way out or that it's the only thing and you don't have to bother with all the other work that's involved. It's not the case at all. I only realised after the fact of getting on the right medication that it didn't matter a damn at that time for me personally what I was doing, what kinds of therapies I was doing, what kind of mantras I had, how many walks I went on, how many cups of tea I had. Nothing was helping me get my head out of the swamp because I needed help. My body was so far gone with not producing like serotonin, just pumping all the, cortisol. I didn't really stand a chance on my own at that point. And it was the bravest thing I ever did was to say to my boyfriend and family, because at the time, all I'd heard of medication was on movies, someone being on Prozac, being a nut job. I didn't want that. And people looked at you like a bit afraid that, oh, he's on medication.
Well, a lot of people think if I take one of these pills, that's me. I'm going to be chomping these things like Smarties for the rest of my life.
So there's a big difference, obviously, between like an antidepressant, which is often diagnosed or prescribed for anxiety, is not really an addictive thing. It's a very slow thing that helps to, over time, address some of the chemical imbalances to help you, to just help. It's like visually, right? I'm down here and I'm doing all these things and I can't get up. But then the medication just brings you to here. And now I can benefit from things, if it's working for you, I can benefit from all the things that we know we need to do. You still need to do all those things that you have to figure out for you what it is. But the medication just, it was the scaffolding that held me up at that time.
Yeah.
And
so you took antidepressants then, did you?
So, and I still do.
Yeah.
I was prescribed, I had to beg my doctor for them. I was like, look, I need help here. And I hated that because, again, I wasn't looking for, it wasn't like this thing of, oh, she's just looking for like a little pill to make it all go away. Like, of course we all want that. But I was like, I know I need to advocate for myself here. And I know that I have tried everything and I'm doing so many different things and I'm not getting anywhere. I need some support. And I had to really fight for that myself. So at first I got prescribed a medication called Effexor, which didn't do anything for me. I just wasn't feeling any different at all. You have to be very clear with your doctor and go back and be like, don't just, be a wallflower about it saying this is not doing anything for me or this is making everything so much worse. Then I went on Prozac. Now, something that people also don't realise about medication is, especially when it's the right one for you, it can make everything a whole lot worse before it makes it better. In those first kind of 4 weeks, as things are trying to balance, the way I would have explained it, and this is probably not medically accurate, but I thought of it as it had to kind of stop you from producing serotonin to force your brain to produce more of it. So for a while there, it's like, and then it's like, oh, okay. And after a few weeks, which I persevered through, and because someone had told me and I knew to watch out for that, because a lot of people I think just drop off it then because they're like, why would I want to feel worse? This just feels unnatural to take something that's making me feel worse. I came through it and it was just like this fog lifted and I was now 2 feet on the ground, feeling a little bit less like I was a prisoner to all those anxiety symptoms. And now I could benefit slowly but surely from things like the right kind of exercise, the right kind of CBT therapy for me was much better than talking therapy, because talking therapy, I had talked around and around in circles about how I was feeling. I knew I was anxious. I didn't need someone to point that out to me. I needed solutions. I needed to be practical. I needed experiments. I needed to take myself like from beginning to end, I suppose.
That's interesting because I think therapy is almost seen as the bread and butter of getting better. And you don't often hear people say what you've just said in terms of talking therapy does nothing for me. And sometimes even if you say that, you're like, you just didn't find the right person. Mm-hmm. That I love that you went, okay, this is a form of treatment. It's not working for me. I'm going to do something else. Yeah. And that's okay.
I think it depends. It depends.
Sometimes people go to a therapist, they get nothing from it. They're sick of talking about themselves. As you say, they already know.
Oh, yeah.
And then they go, oh, great, I've now failed at therapy.
Well, like a lot of it was like, and how are you feeling? I'm like, I feel fucking shite. And I know that. But I needed to switch gears. Now, there's times in my life now, like where talking therapy is really beneficial and I just need to talk about things and voice things that I don't want to voice elsewhere. But for that particular problem, I needed like a practical intervention. So cognitive behavioral therapy was absolutely the game changer for me, but not on its own. It was that plus medication, plus other things. Like I took away, caffeine from my diet at the time because I was like, that alone might make a difference, but there's no point in adding more stimulants on when you're already pretty stimulated as is.
Yeah. For people might be aware of CBT, have heard about it, maybe feel like they should know exactly what it is. What does that look like if you're sitting in front of somebody and they're doing that with you?
So I imagine a triangle, and there's 3 points, and there's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and they all affect each other and influence each other. So it's kind of thought-based experiments, such as questioning whether something is a fact or an opinion. So I'm going to go to the shop and I'm going to have a panic attack. Is that a fact or opinion? Well, it's right now, it's an opinion. So it's those kind of little experiments, a lot of pen and paper. And I love the practical homework element of it. A lot of actually going out in the world and doing things.
Are you a list maker?
I'm a list maker, but I'm not a list follow througher.
Yeah.
I like to make them and then I just go, eh.
Well, you seem to have an organised brain, or sort of a researchy...
It helped put me in the driving seat. It helped me feel like I was actually doing something practical, and it was empowering in and of itself just to say, right, this weekend, I'm going to go away on this weekend with my mum. I'm terrified for these reasons and this is what I'm going to do, and then I'm going to report back. And every week I had homework, and it was lots of different types of usually thought-based experiments that would then, so how did you feel? What were you thinking? What did the thoughts make you feel? What did the feelings make you do? What was the action or the behaviour that came from that thought?
That's really interesting, isn't it? It's essentially, it's detachment, learning to detach from your symptoms and from those anxieties, creating that level of self-awareness, which is something we've spoken about in this series. And so that you're almost standing there in a lab coat with a pad and a pen, looking at yourself going, okay, interesting. Mm-hmm. Oh, look, when that happened, I did this. Mm-hmm. So you're now sort of observing yourself, which is, again, mindfulness in action. And you're in a position then where you're not down in the weeds with everything that you're feeling. You do have that separation.
And with CBT, that's how I got to that point, like you mentioned earlier about having the anxiety goggles, where I could say, hold on a minute, if we just step back and take like a helicopter view of what's going on here, when you go into an anxious wave, and it still happened to me with medication, like I still now, like I was happy on it, I didn't need to rush off it. It doesn't mean I don't feel anxiety, but I'm much better equipped now to move through it relatively easily and quickly. And it kind of doesn't really happen that much anymore. But at the time, even when I was on the right medication, it was still happening to me in waves, is the only way I could ever really describe it. But when I was in a wave, I started to notice that I would be jumping ahead. My thoughts would jump ahead to things that were coming down the line, like, 2 weeks, 3 weeks from now, thinking I'm not going to be able for that. I'm not going to be able for that. And then realizing that as I came out of the wave and all of the physical feelings settled, the thoughts would change as well. So I had to learn, I cannot trust what my mind is telling me, what my thoughts are when I'm in an anxious wave, just to let them happen, to let the thoughts come and write them down and acknowledge that, I'm thinking that way because I'm feeling this way. But as that settles down, the thoughts will settle as well. So for me, it was kind of allowing the physical stuff to, when you asked me earlier about which comes first, giving the physical stuff a chance to settle and trusting that the thoughts will follow suit was really powerful.
Yeah.
So to this day, it's like, okay, the anxious goggles are on. Everything feels different. Everything feels heightened, a little bit scary. There's threats everywhere. You're not going to think this way and feel this way in a matter of time when your
system
naturally calms down, and that will happen.
Do you use? So there, you've got the awareness of the thoughts. You're allowing the thoughts to come and go, and you're not, again, getting down into the weeds with those thoughts, and you're not assuming that they're all true. In fact, you're assuming that they're probably not true, but you're not.
And they feel very true when you're in it, but exactly. I know, give it time.
Yeah.
Give it time.
Are you using any breathing techniques? How do you calm your physical sense then? Or do you just literally, again, just let it pass?
I've never been, as you describe, a bit of a crisis meditator, which never really worked out for me because it needs to be a practice. As we all know, it needs to be something you do when things are good. And when things were okay, I just didn't want to know about it. It took me a long time to realize that I had to take care of myself when I was feeling relatively okay as well, and not just when I was back in the weeds. I liked guided meditations. I like being able to just I don't want to have to do the work. I wanted to hand over to a voice that I could just say, well, I will just follow. But for me, the Ujjayi breathing technique was, am I saying that right?
Yeah.
I found really massively beneficial for anxiety. So
sometimes it's called Darth Vader breathing.
Oh, right. Okay.
Sorry.
I don't know if I sounded quite like Darth Vader, so maybe I'm referencing the wrong one, but I'll do it here. So I would be lying down on my bed and I would, do a deep belly breath, like the tiniest little straw opening of control, letting it go. And that's just kind of slowing things down for me. And it would feel immediately like I'm in control of my body. I'm okay.
So you took one breath into your belly and then you let that breath go with a really pursed lips, like slow. You're blowing through a tiny straw.
Or sometimes I would kind of restrict my throat and be like...
Yeah, that's the Ujjayi breathing. Is our dogs do it. If you hear dogs sitting down, they go...
Yeah, so lots of that.
Yeah, or I find I do it more as I get older and sit into chairs. I go...
Yeah.
But that's where the Darth Vader
kind of mimic a relaxing, like assume a relaxing body breathing position, and it will kind of convince everything to get on board.
Yeah. Well, you're making relaxing breathing sounds. Like if you're really sleepy, you're going to go...
Yeah. So that kind of closing the throat a little bit, and maybe so either of those.
Yeah. But like, I know you mentioned crisis meditating there. I think if anyone is a crisis meditator, that's better than not doing it at all. Like there's a scale. You can be the person who on one end never does it, and then the other end is monk in the monastery who does it for 16 hours a day. Mm-hmm. And, the further we go up that scale, the more benefits we're going to see. But I prefer that someone did it every now and again, in a dentist waiting room or in the middle of a panic attack or, than and not scold ourselves because... I know I should be doing it every day, and
I know, and you don't need any more blame on top of it. And I don't know if this is something that you would agree with, but when I was in like a real anxious wave, the idea of meditating alone is kind of disconcerting because I don't really want to be left alone with my thoughts. I don't want to observe them. It can make you feel more anxious. So doing the more guided approach made me feel a little bit safer. Like I had company, like I had something to follow because anxiety is so much thoughts and thinking ahead, and I know we're trying to like let that happen and observe it without judgment, but putting yourself in a heightened situation of just letting all the thoughts come and go when you're really anxious can be a bit unnerving.
Of course, it's not easy to do when you're not freaking out.
Yeah, Yeah.
And for a lot of people, particularly if you're hypersensitive of what's happening underneath your skin, because maybe you have been dealing with anxiety for a long length of time. And every sort of skipped heartbeat or weird tummy feeling triggers oh crap, oh God, I hope it's not coming on. If you ask someone who's experiencing that, okay, really focus on your breath now, focus on where the breath is going, it can make them more anxious, So it's not necessarily either that that's automatically going to work. Maybe there's another style or another technique that isn't so intense. I think if you're interospective, I think it's called, where you're, where you're hyper aware of what's happening inside your body, that maybe it's an exteroceptive meditation or technique or, that could suit you.
Something I have only very recently discovered, and now I'm obsessed, and I wish I had it back then, but I am majorly now into my ASMR.
Yeah, so explain that for people.
So autonomic sensory meridian response, it's just a fancy sounding word for getting kind of brain and body tingles. And there's certain triggers that will affect certain people. And I always knew that I was one of these people. It didn't have the framework, the wording. But when, my mom would tell me a certain story or someone kind of stroking your head, and I'd be like, oh, this will be the bit you use on the clip. Where I just like... Oh, like it's honestly, and it's been likened to a brain orgasm, but there's nothing sexual about it. It's pure, like, intense relaxation radiating from the top of your head down.
Is it like those spindly things that you rub off the top of your head that freak some people out, but other people like me, I can't get enough of it?
So I did a whole podcast on ASMR because it's fascinating to me. Apparently only 1/5 of the population are receptive to it, but that's because only 1/5 of the people in this study were receptive to this particular type of ASMR. I think there's an awful lot of untapped ASMR therapy there for people. It is.
Do people use their voices?
It's on. I watch it on YouTube. Yeah. So kind of. Yeah. And the other thing is, misophonia is like the opposite of ASMR, and so some people can get really riled up and anxious by people's lip sounds, breathing sounds, mouth sounds.
That's what I have. If someone's eating an apple a kilometre away, I have to hide under a barn.
So funnily enough, I experience both. It depends on my mood, but I go onto YouTube. So there's this whole like underworld of YouTube of ASMR artists, and they have millions of followers. And I realized that I really responded well to like a very soft whispering tone of voice. And I would notice it because I'd be on Instagram stories sometimes and somebody would be talking and I'd feel my body go into that state. And I don't care what they were saying. And I'd go back and I'd rewatch all their stories like an absolute creep because it was having such an intensely relaxing effect on me.
Yeah.
So then I was like, I need to do this with, not with people on Instagram who are unintentionally having this ASMR effect on me. So I started YouTubing things, finding things, and there's 1 or 2 or 3 accounts that I follow, and they make these videos, and a lot of it's like this sounds absolutely tapped, but it's the idea of someone giving you personal attention or talking to you like you've had a hard day and saying, okay, I'm gonna take your makeup off, and even though it's not happening, when you see their hand kind of go up, you get the tingles as if it's happening to your face, and the tones of their voice, the whispering, the little sounds. And it's my dirty little secret. Like I will finish a meeting and my husband will think that I'm like really hard at work and I'm lying in bed like watching an ASMR video. And it is the quickest, most effective way to downregulate my stress response, to the point that I probably shouldn't do it during the day because I don't even think I could trust myself to drive afterwards. It's that relaxing for me.
Amazing.
So that's my form of meditation now. Again, I like it because it takes me out of my mind, takes me out of me feeling responsible for achieving something. And
you're just sliding into the passenger seat there for a while.
And it's bliss for me.
Let's talk about your son, because you're on a whole other path. What age is he?
He will be 4 in August. Okay. So as he says, he's 3.5 and a little bit.
Too cute. Yeah. Do you use his name?
Caelan.
Caelan.
Yeah, Caelan.
So Caelan is 3.5 and a little bit. Mm-hmm. And what's he been experiencing, and what's been your path over the last while? So from day one, he came into the world with what I describe as an air of concern about him, a lot like his mammy. Just was quite a discontented baby, wasn't happy, up, down, in, out. Like I just like reflux, all these different baby things that just make a baby unhappy. Sleep was very difficult for him. Just wasn't a very happy baby really. And I felt like, what am I doing wrong? As he became more of a toddler, it just became more challenging. Like he seems to have, funnily enough, a lot of anxiety on his shoulders. And it's very easy for people then to say, well, maybe he's just feeding that off you. And that's a whole other conversation. You're projecting it onto him because you're clutching your pearls every 5 minutes.
And if anything, I'm so aware of anxiety and so open and respectful of his little fears and worries that I know I am not exacerbating anything for him. But he, as I know now, has still a very small window of tolerance. He's a highly sensitive person, a highly sensitive little boy. He feels things greatly. And so our day-to-day just became really, really difficult, to the point that I struggle so much with feeling like it's just me and my fault and that I can't handle it, or that it's my mindset that's the problem. Because a lot of people have said that to me and said, you just need to like just chill out. And like this idea that chill kids are chill because their parents are chill, honestly, fuck off. Because I could have another child and it could be the most horizontal child ever, and I am who I am. They have their own temperaments that we don't necessarily get to decide on. Some kids are just wound that way. They're just sensitive. They're anxious. They see threats where they don't exist. They think about things more. And some kids just don't. and the same parents could be having, the same kids.
Do you find that when you're on a journey like that with your child that everyone is offering their 2 cents?
Yes, and it's also my own fault because I've shared a lot of things, which I'm happy to do because I know that it's worth a lot of people feeling like less alone. But the price of admission for that is, unfortunately, being on social media is a lot of, well, not a lot of, but some nasty comments and opinions. And so, yeah, that I kind of gave myself another layer of parental anxiety there when it was enough to be dealing with as is. So in the midst of all that, and struggling a lot with social comparison, with as in me comparing my kid to other kids, friends' kids, and being like, he's not like them, and God, it seems to be so much easier for them. They're just so much more like willing to play or easygoing, or they'll have meltdowns, but they'll move past them relatively quickly, and our meltdowns would go on.
Yeah. So what kind of things does he display then?
Severe separation anxiety. So last year was really tough when he was meant to start Montessori, and I tried and I tried and I tried, and the whole world tells you need to just leave them and they have to just get over it and they will learn to love it. And I couldn't do it because he unraveled so much. He was so upset, and I could see that he was getting unwell with it. And it wasn't just a case of a bit upset when he was in there and then okay at home. He started to like control. He would control, like he had just been toilet trained, or we're still kind of in the middle of it, but he would hold in his wee as a way to control what he felt so out of control of everything else in his life. And then that started to make him unwell. He just never ever wanted to leave the house. He was really deteriorating. And it was again like a real, I think, brave moment for me and my husband to say, and I had to kind of convince my husband, because we're all in that environment of, he'll push through. He'll be the better for it. Maybe not though, if I keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And if I had been pushed and pushed and pushed as a child, I just don't want to damage his nervous system. I want to respect if he's not ready yet. He doesn't need to go to Montessori yet. It's not a requirement. He's only 3. It's quite young by European standards to expect kids to just be without their primary carer. And we weren't getting anywhere. And, I had to have this conversation with my husband and say, like, I think that we're both waiting for it to be so bad that we can then say to people, oh, look, he got so bad. Like, I'm not running an experiment on our child. I know that this is not working for him. This is so incredibly stressful for all of us. I don't want to create a situation where we give him serious problems and then we have school refusal when the time comes and we really have to. It's like, I'm not doing this to prove something to everyone else. I'm taking him out and we will work with him to build his confidence slowly at our pace, at his pace, and we'll try again next year. And
so do you go down the assessment route?
Yes. So I think from when he turned 2, everything really ramped up, and it was like, this is like toddler on speed level of challenge. Because I had friends who had like several kids, and they were like, my 3 kids are more manageable than your 1 kid, in terms of their experience parenting them. Which was kind, because I felt the whole time like, Jesus, I only have 1 of them and I'm barely able to get through the day with him. So separation anxiety, a lot of control issues, really hard emotional dysregulation, which is standard for kids anyway at that age, but for him, very.
So would that be like screaming 1 minute, happy the next?
No, not up and down. Just I walk on absolute eggshells all the time, and like the whole thing of like, if you broke the banana, or if you peel the banana, they didn't want it. Like there's no coming back from these things for him. And even if we finally got him to settle down, it would come back the next day. He'd still be upset about it. So there was no get on with it, we're on to the next thing. If he didn't want to leave the house, we could not drag him kicking and screaming, because we'd never be able to stay where we were. He would never come around. He wouldn't regulate.
So in a weird way, are you hoping for a diagnosis or a classification or something to go, yes, he's displaying all the signs of X?
Yes and no. When it's been really, really difficult, yeah, I guess I almost need that validation, because it hurts when people take that and say it's just you, and that like, oh, come on, all kids are difficult, just get on with it. And then I feel like or this feeling, which I do have, that like I've gone wrong somewhere to make him feel so anxious in the world or unsure of himself in the world.
I think every parent feels that, whether it's a child as young as yours. or whether they have a 10-year-old daughter who's having nightmares and won't go to sleep, and or maybe it's a teenager who's freaking out at the junior cert or the leaving cert. No matter what age you are as a parent, you have those feelings of, oh God, maybe it was that, the time I shouted at him for, breaking my prize dahlia in the garden, and now I've made him into this. So you're constantly thinking that you've somehow along the way you've dropped the ball and set them on a course where they can't handle the world.
So there is a very defining moment where I feel like I did set the course for him, and I foolishly, this is when he had just turned 2, and I kick myself about it every day because I do feel like a switch went off for him that day. Where I was taking him to a new minder, and the minder was working out of her own house, and she was quite old school and was like, just drop him and leave him, and I wasn't allowed to go in, and he'd never met her before, he'd never been there before, but she said, look, I've never had a kid in 30 years who didn't settle down. So of course that's pressure. It's like, what if my kid is the one kid, and it was stressful because our previous minder had just had to leave very quickly, and I just trusted that people who knew better than me would lead me in the right direction. But I knew that was going to be too much for my son. But everyone was like, he'll be grand. He'll have a bit of a cry and he'll be fine. And one day, I didn't even have the awareness at that point to be able to tell him exactly what was happening when. And now to this day, like, I write a daily schedule for him. We say, this is going to happen. Nothing happens spontaneously in our house. It's got like, we're going to be going out in 20 minutes. So let's do this, because he just couldn't cope otherwise. But at that time, I didn't know how sensitive he was turning out to be. And he thought we were going for a walk. And I just like wheeled him into this person's house, and he started saying, no, 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 no. And she took him off me, and he started like screaming, and I was like, and she closed the door in my face, and she's like, it'd be grand, it'd be grand. She also has 2 like massive dogs. Now he's deathly afraid of big dogs. And I was just like, oh my God, how is this natural? How is this what people have to do? And I walked away, and like 10 minutes later she rang me, and she's like, Caroline, you're going to have to come back and get him. There's something wrong with this child. Like, is he like this at home? He's actually getting really aggressive, because he was so frightened that he was like pulling and hitting, and he's not a violent kid. Like, he doesn't lash out like that at all. She's like, and he's upsetting all the other kids, and I can't have this happen. And I ran back, and he was like, it took me hours to bring his little breathing pattern back to what it was. And from that day on, so to this day, it's still a huge effort for us to get him to be comfortable leaving the house, because I think that he got such a fright that he was brought somewhere and abandoned. Can you imagine how that feels as a mother, to feel like you've actually made that mistake? And he was in there for no more than 10 minutes, and it was a major, major, major learning. But I do feel like a lot of this is my fault. And I can't know for sure.
Saying that, do you not feel that some part of you knows you're being incredibly hard on yourself?
Yeah.
Like, we can't be with them and make the right decision in every moment of their lives going forward.
Mm-hmm. I know. I just feel like it's so, for a kid that sensitive and that young, something that's like, 10 minutes of being upset in that environment and context for him had such a knock-on effect. It feels so significant for me. And
couldn't you see it almost as testing? Like, that's a perfectly normal thing to do, what you did. Like, parents are doing that every day of the week. Your child reacted in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
It's, if you were to put on your lab coat again and have your notepad, you'd be like, oh, okay, so when we do this, he is absolutely not comfortable with that. It's upsetting to witness, but that's a parameter we have now tested. So that's information. Is there an ability to do a little bit of that? And because I think I'm just really conscious that anybody listening to this will be thinking, God, she's really beating herself up over that.
And I struggle with that a lot, because I know, first of all, I know the science of self-compassion and self-criticism, and how self-criticism we think is going to be motivating, but it just makes us produce more cortisol. And I don't need any more cortisol, thank you very much. But when it comes to parenting, and it feels like such an enormous responsibility, and you don't judge yourself harsher in any other capacity, I don't think, than in your role as a parent. And because it felt so like from that day on, we went down a different road, I almost have to like learned to forgive myself that may or may not have, it may have influenced things. It may not have. Like, we already knew, like, from day one that he was, like, super sensitive. And especially if we come out of this assessment now and have, you know, any kind of diagnosis, then that won't have been my fault, you know. So maybe that's part of why I'm looking for more information. But with the assessment, the thing is really, it's not going to change him. And there might not be a diagnosis, but it's to better understand his psychological profile and what works for him, what doesn't, what his strengths are, so we can lean into them and better support him, so we can all just have a little bit of a better time, because it hasn't been great and there's been an awful lot more difficult days than good days. And that's been really, really hard.
Mm. Even if there was no diagnosis.
And there might not be.
I still feel that, you know, it's not something to be hard on yourself about doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, if it's just an occasion that just didn't work out the way you wanted to and it was really upsetting, you know, you did it from a place of kindness and goodness and caring, and it, you know.
And I would say that to anybody else, and I would really hammer it home that, you know, you have to be compassionate with yourself. But I think it's so much easier to apply compassion to other people. It's definitely easier to apply compassion to myself when it's about myself. But if it's about my son, I find like I am his scaffolding, and I let a hole form, I suppose. But I know it's not healthy and helpful. And I would love to say that I'm over it, but I can't help but feel a little bit like I am to blame for some of what he's gone through, or have maybe made things worse in some ways by some of the mistakes that I've made, which I think a lot of people probably do feel. I don't know, I guess it's going to take time. I mean, I'm sure, you know, even in another year's time, we've already seen so much growth from him and so much more confidence coming, and it comes along eventually. And I'll be less like, oh, that day that you did that thing.
Yeah, well, our perspective is growing. You're growing as a parent, you know, and as adults, we are just products of all the, you know, the things we've bounced off, you know, as a pinball in we bounce off things and we learn stuff about ourselves, and, you know, it's impossible for us to be cradled and brought in the perfect line, you know, and as parents, I understand it's totally hard. And again, you know, with older kids, you're thinking, oh God, was there something I might have done now when they were 5? You know, I remember that night I went in and I roared at them, you know, when they wouldn't go to sleep. Maybe I actually made him anxious that night. I mean, I have those thoughts as well. But again, I have to think about my own upbringing. And there was things that were, you know, if you grew up in the 70s, 80s and 90s, how the hell are we still alive?
I know.
You know,
I know.
I'm conscious of your time. I'm conscious that you have a life to live, and
I could stay here all day.
I've so enjoyed it. I think
Me
people
too.
will get so many takeaways. Best of luck with Caelan. I hope everything.
Thank you.
Am I pronouncing his name right?
Yeah.
Best of luck with Caelan. I hope that you navigate the situation with ease, and that it's not going to be too challenging for you. And I'm sure whatever happens, it sounds like you're the most caring, wonderful mom. So I think he's in the most beautiful of hands.
Thank you. Well, I do remember being told, you know, you're already a good parent because you care that much, and only good parents care, or only bad parents don't care, or something like that. That if you're worrying, it's a good sign, which is not great for anxious people like me. But I'd also just like to say, and first of all, thank you for having me and giving me the space. It's so nice to be able to like go deeper. I probably haven't gone that deep on the anxiety stuff in a really long time. But for anyone listening who's there or worried about being on their way there, I never thought that I'd be okay again. And I really am, like, I got back to the point of not just surviving, but thriving and catching up on all the experiences that I felt that were taken from me at the time, like traveling. And really the key for me is learning to allow space for anxiety. And like, if I book a flight, instead of being like, oh, I can't not feel anxious on this trip away, just like bring it with you, put it in the bag. Be like, yeah, you're there. You can, if you want to rear your head up, I'll deal with you. You're not unwelcome here, because your anxiety is there to communicate with you when something is not right. and it's a useful tool, and it's got your back in a lot of ways. And I don't fear the anxiety anymore at all. I turn into it and say, okay, what do I need in this moment? What's going on? I do that helicopter view of, is there other things at play here that might be, or vulnerability factors that are giving rise to anxiety? I'm very good with the self-compassion when it comes to my anxiety. And I am so far from where I thought I'd ever be mental health perspective wise at that point. And I really didn't think I'd get there. So I really want people to know you have absolutely every reason to believe that you're going to come through this.
Amazing. You could say you're owning it.
Someone wrote a book about that.
Caroline, thank you so much.
Thank you.